Okay, hi guys, so welcome back to my channel. Today's video was actually highly requested. I'm going to be talking about debriefing cases in the context of preparing for CFE essentially. So this video is going to have two main sections. In the first part, I'm going to be sitting here, I'm going to be kind of giving an introduction to debriefing, and then in the second part of the video, it's actually going to be recorded on my computer screen of me walking through debriefs that I did to prepare for CFE 2019, and then I'm going to be kind of talking over that recording of me doing stuff on my screen. So in this first part of the video, when I'm kind of introducing debriefing, I'm going to be talking about things like why is debriefing so important and what should your goal be. I'm going to be talking about how deep should you be going when you're debriefing, like how much time should you be spending. And then I'm also just going to be touching upon how do you integrate the learning that you undergo during the debriefing process, how do you integrate that with your existing notes throughout kind of the preparation process. So with that being said, I'll start talking about my first little subtopic here. Okay, so what is the main goal of debriefing and why is it so important? The main goal is basically identify what went right and what went wrong, and then take the information you get from that to apply into the future to improve basically. So I guess first you're identifying what went wrong and what went right. For the things that went right, congratulate yourself and make sure you know that it went right so that you can continue to do the same thing from this point onwards. For the things that went wrong, you're saying, what can I do to fix this? And it might have gone wrong in terms of technical knowledge. So for example, you might not have even known what the principal residence exemption was. Or it could have gone wrong more in terms of application, in terms of that specific case. So for example, you might have known what the principal residence exemption was, but then when it came time to calculate the average capital gain per property per year and select the most beneficial one for that particular case, you didn't actually do that part properly, right? So depending on if it went wrong from more of a technical knowledge perspective or more of a case application perspective, that's going to influence what you're doing. So you might be actually learning what something is, and it might be more of like a studying and a memorization sort of thing. Or if it was more application related error, you might be doing more of a, it's like practice, like you might actually be completely re-attempting that specific AO, and then remarking yourself. So why is this process so important though? The reason why it's important is because if you're completing cases, okay, great, you're submitting it by the deadline, you know, you're spending the time doing it, but you're not actually figuring out what you did incorrectly, then you're essentially going to be practicing how to do things incorrectly. So unless you've specifically identified it as an error, you're probably going to do the same thing again next time because you thought that was right, correct? So you're almost going to be like locking in or like building upon this incorrect understanding that you have. You're practicing how to do it wrong. So it's beneficial for you to identify your errors earlier on so that not only are you not practicing how to do it wrong, but you're having more time to practice doing it right. So I mean, that's why it's really important to identify the things you don't know, but it's also important to identify when you've done something right, because if you like absolutely killed an AO and you did a format or something or a way of presenting your answer that really allowed you to pick up marks, then you also want to identify like this worked really well and I'm going to apply the same format from this point going onward, right? To minimize your active thought processes and actual like problem solving you have to do in the future. So that's why it's so important to debrief. Okay, so one of the questions that I got the most on my other CFE related videos was how much time should you be spending debriefing? And I mean, this depends on a variety of factors. So this depends on how much time do you have, how much time is available to you, how much time do you need to spend debriefing. Like there's a big difference between getting all C's on a case and maybe 1 or 2 RCs and then getting mostly NCs and RCs, right? Like that's not the same scenario, and you're gonna have to invest a different amount of time debriefing each of those cases. And then how much time you spend debriefing also depends on whether it counts as kind of like content studying time for you. So for me, there was a very fine line between debriefing time and studying time, because the whole time that I was debriefing, I was also updating or reviewing and confirming or even creating new formal notes almost. So it was not like I had designated time where I was specifically debriefing as much and specifically studying as much. So if you watch my other video where I talk about my technical binder for financial reporting issues, so every time I was debriefing a case, every time there was a financial reporting issue, I would be either creating a new section in my technical binder or updating and improving existing sections, right? So in that sense, it would seem maybe like I was spending a lot of time debriefing, but then that's also less time that I'm spending content studying, I guess. So, and then other things that would impact how much time you spend debriefing would be things like, do you have a few days until your next case writing date, or are you writing another case tomorrow? Like if you have 3 days until you have to write another case, then I mean you have a lot more time available to you to debrief the one that you wrote yesterday. But if it's at a particular scheduled time where you're writing like numerous cases in very close proximity, then you might be spending less time just because there's less time available to you. So yeah, I mean, I wish I could give a really like clean answer to this as to how much time you should be spending debriefing, but I can't, because it depends so much on these very individual and time-specific factors. So I'll talk now about how deep you should be going when you're debriefing, because it's very closely related. So how deep you should be going when you're debriefing, to me this depends on what type of AO it was. So if it was like a strategy and governance AO or something and I got RC, then it's probably not going to take me that long to kind of gain the requisite knowledge and understanding that I would need to get a C next time. But if it was maybe like a tax calculation AO and I got NC, let's say, that's gonna require a significant amount of depth, right? Because I'm likely gonna have to look at some technical knowledge in terms of like actual CRA rules or whatnot, and then I'm gonna have to do practices of application. So it might take me like 10 minutes to debrief a strategy and governance AO, but then it might take me literally like over an hour to debrief a single tax AO. So, and the amount of almost like effort and the amount of a deep dive that you have to do totally depends on the nature of the AO and its extent. So again, kind of a case-specific situation there, guys. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about in this little introductory section relates to integrating what you do during your debriefing time with your existing notes. So I think a lot of people will have like formal notes that might be in like a Word doc or a Google doc, you know. There might even be things that they are notes they're carrying forward from their modules or from a accredited program or even from undergrad, right? So it's kind of like, okay, I'm doing all this work debriefing, how do I integrate this with my existing kind of material repository? So what I did was, for each case that I wrote in Capstone 2, I was storing this all in Google Docs, just because that's what was easiest for me. So each case had its own folder, and within its folder there would be the case text itself, my feedback guide, any other documents that I was provided during Capstone 2. So I think they provide like a debrief document or something. Basically anything I had relevant to that case would be in that folder. And then I would have a Google Doc that would be the debrief document for each case, and that's what I'm going to be showing you in the second part of this video, so stay tuned for that. But you'll see that in my debrief documents, where I had linkages to existing formal notes, or where I had updated formal notes as a result of something that I had found during my debrief, I noted that in my debrief document. So for those of you who are in auditing, it's almost like referencing working papers. But yeah, so when people ask me also like, how long did it take you to make your technical binder? Again, I can't really like answer that, because it was such a continuous process over months and months and months. Every time you debrief, your key takeaways, you want to update your existing materials that you refer to. It's like almost just like a constant improvement thing, like you're constantly leveling up for months and months up until you finally reach the exam day. Okay guys, so in conclusion, before we move on to the actual review on the screen of my past debriefs, I guess my biggest takeaway here is that when you're debriefing, you're not trying to get your knowledge and application on every issue to the point where you're gonna get a CD. That's not, number one, there's not time for it, but number two, it's not realistic, it's overwhelming, it's demoralizing. I guess what I want to emphasize is that you should be getting a few key takeaways out of every case. If you can pick up 3 to 5 solid new things out of every case that you do, new ways to apply something, a new technical knowledge, a new tip of how to organize this type of answer, and you actually can effectively apply that every single, from the next time onwards for all of these cases that you do, you're in pretty good shape. And that's kind of what I want to emphasize is people be like, oh, it took me 8 hours to debrief this case so that I knew how to get every single thing on the feedback guide for every single AO, and I'm like, okay, but why, right? You don't need to do that to pass the exam, and when it comes down to it, what we're trying to do here is pass the exam. Okay, so we'll move into the second part of this video now. This is gonna go now into a recording of my computer screen, and I'm gonna be scrolling around in debrief documents that I had from June, July, August 2019. Okay, so now that I have kind of introduced the concept of debriefing, I'm gonna actually walk through some examples of my own debrief processes and kind of explain my thought processes as I'm doing this and show the documents that I was creating while doing my debrief. So first I'm going to show an example of a case where the scale of the debrief or the amount of time that I had to put in the debrief was very little. But then the main meat here is that I'm going to be talking about these two cases where I kind of had an average or a moderate amount of debrief required. And that's going to be more of a realistic look at what a debrief will be for probably most people watching this video. So here we look at one case. So this is a day 2 case, 5 hours, as you can see by the number of AOs. This was a case that I did in week 4 out of 7 of Capstone 2. So when I was creating I did a debrief document for each case. And I would often just pull in my feedback, this isn't even the feedback guide, my grades, I guess, my overall grades into each document so that I can just very quickly refer to it, and you'll see how it ties in with the format that I use below. This just it gives you a very quick snapshot of how you did on the case without having to be clicking back and forth between a lot of documents, some of which are password protected, etc. So this case, we can see that I absolutely smashed it. This is a perfect example of a case where my debriefing time would be very little. There's not much to do, right? So we can see that I got 1 RC, and this was a financial reporting one on warranty provision. I'm just noting to myself here below that this FR issue and the few other FR issues that are somewhere in here, I'm basically just going to update my technical binder. And guys, I released a video a little bit ago about my financial reporting technical binder. I'm not going to explain it here, but I would highly recommend watching that video after this one. So for my debrief for this one, all I had to do was perfect my the relevant financial reporting issues in my technical binder. Other than that, there's very little for me to do here. I blatantly knew what I was doing. Okay, so now we'll look at an example of a more average debrief required. So this was a day 3 case. I did this in week 6 out of 7 of Capstone 2. So we can see that I got an acceptable mark in 5 out of 6 of the AOs, but I never like to leave anything in an RC. I like to bring everything up to a C just for comfort. So there's going to be 3 out of 6 AOs here that I'm really going to be debriefing. So first, we'll look at AO4, a tax one, and this was the one that I flopped the most on. So here we go. I begin to proceed into the debrief of this specific AO. I note to myself where my formal note on this topic is stored, if applicable, and then I'll often split my debrief into the main theoretical points, then the actual practical steps as to how I would apply this in a case situation to pick up marks. So these are actually 2 very separable components of knowledge to me. First, I want to actually understand what the theory is behind this. So in this case, it's the applicable rules per CRA. And then it's okay, so now you know what this is. how are you actually going to attack this issue next time you see it in a case that you can actually pick up marks, because that's what matters, right? So so I had ascertained that I basically like blatantly did not know how to do this at this point. So I'm going to look at my feedback guide and be like, okay, what is the bare minimum that I need to do to pick up marks, and where did I go wrong? So we can see here that I got N on this, like I did terrible on this section. Basically, I need to, in my answer, integrate some of just the basic facts of what the PRE is. Kind of more of like, I'm not going to say qualitative, but it's more of just like an introduction of what this is. Then there's the actual more quantitative, where you're doing the calculation, and then you have to provide a conclusion on which single property to designate as the PRE for that year. So in my practical application steps for myself, this is basically like, this is all based on the rubric, right? I'm looking at what does CPA, in my case CPA Ontario, need me to do to give me marks. Okay, this is how I pick up marks. So we can see here that I'm basically getting I would have a little introduction at the start of my case answer, and then I'm proceeding through those quantitative calculations that they directly outline that you need to perform in the rubric, and then I designate the property, right? So it's bare minimum that I need to do to pick up marks. Okay, so now that I understand what this is, I understand how to apply it next time. Okay, I'm ready to move on to my next AO that I didn't do too well on. In this case, it's another taxation one. I got an RC. So in this case, I kind of knew what I was doing, but it's like I didn't absolutely kill it, but I also don't straight up not know what this is. I'm kind of like in between on here. So again, I'm going to go to the rubric and look at what went wrong. When we look at the three major steps of how they mark moving expenses, we can see that I actually got partial on all three of them, meaning that I kind of know how to do everything, but I don't really know how to do anything. So what went the most wrong here is basically that I didn't remember enough of the deductible elements. We see here that you need to get 5 yeses to get a 5 of these discussed to get a yes. I got 4 discussed and 1 attempted, but I mean, to be safe, I would always like to get 6 discussed. So because I have now identified the fact that what went wrong for me is that I didn't get enough deductible elements, in my debrief, what am I going to do? I'm going to teach myself what the deductible elements are. So I'm really clearly outlining to myself, these are things that you can deduct as a moving expense. These are things that you cannot deduct as a moving expense. And so that's going to fix me in number 2 here. And I can see here that I got a partial here as well, and I basically needed to outline whether or not she was eligible. So here we go. You can see that I'm directly responding to what caused me to not get yeses per the rubric. I'm doing it in a way that's like super understandable for myself, you know? Like, I'm not making it too crazy. It's about picking up the bare minimum that you need to get the marks next time. Okay, so let's see. I think that was the extent of my debrief on this one. It appears that I didn't debrief this. A lot of the time, management accounting, it's like very situational, and I can't do these sorts of notes on it. So in this case, this was all that I did to debrief. I now know that next time I can get C's on this. And if next time I wrote this case again, I got C's on this, and I got 5 out of 6 C's and 1 RC, then realistically, that was a pretty good go. So I'm going to move now on to the third case. So let's see, which one is this? So this is another day 3 case, and I did this in week 7 out of 7 in capstone 2. So I'm looking at my rubric here, and I'm like, this is a pretty nice result. Like, the first 4 out of 7, I absolutely smashed it. I'm totally comfortable with those. I do not need to do any more work on it. The last 3, I did okay. I mean, there is some room for improvement. And we can see here that for myself in my debrief document, I put my 2 major takeaways in red font. I didn't always do this, but if there was something that I was messing up every single time, or I kept making the same mistake every single time, or I had made the same mistake in each one that I got RC, then I'm going to pull that out as a main takeaway.
and make it super clear to myself, this went wrong this time, don't do it again next time. So, let's see. Yeah, and just because something is a C doesn't mean I'm like not going to look at it at all, because sometimes it's like, okay, I barely cleared the C, but I knew while I was doing it that there were certain things that I didn't quite understand or that I could have been more comfortable with. So we can see here that I did get a C on AO4, but we can see that I did do some more debrief below. And the reason why I did this is because this is what was shown as possible things that I could discuss in the feedback guide. The ones that are highlighted green are the ones that I got. So okay, I got a discussed on 4, so that that put me far enough ahead to get a C, but there were so many things that I also missed, right? So then I'm literally just putting like very direct notes to myself. For future reference, when you're discussing a similar situation, make sure you comment on these things, Like I'm really just giving it to myself clear so I can refer back to this at any point later on in my preparation, and I'm not really trying to like dig for the main takeaways. That's why this is literally at the top of the page in red font, right? So now we're going to look at AO5, which is the strategy and governance. And I'm kind of like, I don't know, I like to kind of like congratulate myself or something. It's like, okay, so you did it pretty well, but just do these 2 things next time. I'm not just like making myself feel like super, almost used bad language, but I'm also acknowledging the things that I did right, is what I want to say. Because as important as it is to identify what you did wrong and change that next time, it's also important to identify what you did right and make sure that you continue to do that in the future. And then again here, I spell it out for myself very clearly. You got an RC this time, but to get a C next time, these are the things that you should do. And then I like to give myself formats, right? Because as I discussed in my technical binder video, like we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. If you have a format that picks you up all of the marks that you need every single time, use the same format every single time, right? Like minimize the active thinking that you have to do. And then I give myself a format to use for next time when I have to discuss whether or not they're acting in line with their mission and vision. Very similar format even to some of the FR issues. So again, keeping it consistent, minimizing my active thinking. And then I relate it back to a case that I did earlier, and I tell myself how I should format it next time. Okay, so now we are moving on to AO6, which was that's just procedures, okay? Procedures, and again, I congratulate myself, okay, you were doing it right, but this is what you need to do next time to bring yourself from an RC to a C. I remind myself of the proper format to use. In this case, when I'm doing assurance procedures, I'm always using the account risk assertion procedure format. And yeah, again, I'm acknowledging my strengths. I put enough detail. I noted what I had improved on from the past, but then I'm like, okay, don't remember, like there's a lot of substantive procedures that are really common, and you might as well just throw them in, like if you have some extra time. Again, personalizing them, of course, to the case, and then keeping it clear to myself, I have added this learning into my formal note, which is stored in this location. The last one that I debriefed here was AO7, again, a strategy and governance one, so a little bit of a softer one here. And you can see when it's strategy and governance or like ethics or something, it's more softer. A lot of the time it's actually just going to be like purely discussional with myself. Let's see. Whoops, that's supposed to say feedback guide. So again, I'm looking at the feedback guide. I'm like, okay, what did I miss? Okay, I needed to actually explain the implication. And it's like, well, this is what I did, but this is what I didn't do, right? So this is why I did get up to RC, but this is why I didn't get all the way to C. And then something went wrong here, it appears, where I didn't actually identify. I identified the trigger, but I didn't really like interpret it properly, I think. So I bring the actual quote in so I can review it very clearly, looking at it like there's something that I missed about this. And it appears that there was like somewhat of a non-directed one here. And then my last sentence in the discussion of this issue is kind of just the like almost umbrella statement of what went wrong. I was supposed to be adding value, and that is by telling the client what needs to be done even if it's not directly asked. So I'm reminding myself of how I can kind of pick up non-directed issues more effectively. And that's by constantly keeping in mind that I am there to add value, even if they didn't directly ask for it. It might be your job to tell them. So yeah, here, that was an example of, I guess, kind of a walkthrough of what my thought process was when I was debriefing 3 cases. First, that one where I smashed it and there was very little debrief, and then showing what I did to debrief 2 more average cases. Again, I referred several times in this video to my financial reporting issues technical binder, and I really want to emphasize that some of the things I said here might make more sense if you also watch that video. And yeah, I'm hoping to put out a couple more videos in regards to maybe how to get all C's every time on an assurance planning memo or something like that. But yeah, with that being said, I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I wish you guys the best of luck, and please subscribe to see my upcoming ones. Thanks, guys. Bye.